Today's topic, we're talking about creating purpose and clarity at work. And we're going to be able to review 3 kind of simple steps that allow you to gain control and create meaning in your workplace. And so I'm Jared Harding. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Zenger Folkman, and I am very pleased to be able to share this airtime with the legendary Jack Zenger. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And let me begin by just welcoming all and saying that a word about us. So Zenger Folkman is a management consulting firm that focuses very squarely on leadership development. Our approach is to create simple, practical, empirical solutions that build leadership effectiveness within individuals and across an organization's culture. We firmly believe that attention and focus on developing leadership will help individuals thrive and organizations succeed.
We spend a significant amount of our time at work. And, you know, it's not just about the time that we spend there. Our work also represents a significant personal investment for each of us. That's a physical investment, it's a mental investment, an emotional investment. And how does that investment impact, our overall well-being? Are we being rewarded in that investment? Are we getting a good return there, or are we not? Is it not a great motivational place?
And the purpose of today's webinar is really all about how do you make that time as productive and enjoyable as possible.
Simon Sinek, author of a popular book called Start With Why, and he kind of views people saying, "I love my job," shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a human right. And, so is that wishful thinking? Is this some kind of, unreachable utopia? But I think what we do know is that you have a lot of control about how you can create purpose and meaning in your work. And that's what we want to review and talk about today. Our agenda, first realizing that you are in control. And then we want to find, what's missing, what's missing in the equation that can help you find purpose and meaning. And then doing something now. What are the actions that you can take towards, having that sense of fulfillment? As Jack mentioned at the beginning, we're a leadership development firm. And, we really believe that leadership can be a powerful way in which individuals can create purpose in their work. And as we go through, we invite you to think about, and we'll certainly bring up how leadership can be a vehicle that helps you bring meaning and have fulfillment in your job. So we'll talk more about that. All right, so step 1, realizing you are in control. We got two fun words here that we're going to talk about. Philosophers and psychologists have kind of long talked about these 2 types of well-being. And you've got hedonic well-being, which really strives to meet the very basic physiological, psychological needs that we have as humans. And then you've got eudaimonic well-being, and that is kind of a higher level. It strives towards having meaning and finding purpose, and so it's something really beyond just simple self-gratification. And Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, when he talks about meaning, he talks about it as something that comes from surfing something beyond yourself. Jack, does that jive with how you think about meaning and finding meaning?
It does, and I think for those in our on our audience today who are familiar with Maslow's need hierarchy, I guess it seems to me that hedonic really it refers to the very, very lowest level, and the eudaimonic really refers to the highest levels of Maslow's need hierarchy. So it's a different way of conceptualizing kind of what life is about.
So we found some interesting studies around this, and this gentleman, Steve Cole, is a medical professor at UCLA. He ended up looking at these 2 states of well-being and the impact of that on individuals. One of kind of the interesting things out of his study, people are actually better off if they have more of that higher sense, that eudaimonic well-being, even if they did not have kind of that sense of hedonic well-being. So most people, got varying levels of both, but if you're looking more than kind of this activity of you're trying to avoid one and pursue the other, it's his study really showed what you don't want to be without. Even in a workplace, if you felt like maybe some of the basic needs weren't being met, but you had this higher sense of meaning and purpose, he found that people were generally able, more satisfied and things like that, even without that hedonic. Well, if the hedonic side, those basic needs were being met, but they didn't have that higher sense of purpose or meaning, they were worse off. And so Steve Cole and his team found that people that had that sense, that greater sense of fulfillment, had overall higher life satisfaction. They had greater psychological well-being, and so lower anxiety, less depressive kind of symptoms, and there was a greater positive physiological effect. So these people had a lower risk of heart attack. They tended to exercise more and eat better. And the last one I particularly like, they had stronger emotional ties with others, and so their ability to connect with their colleagues and even others outside of work was much stronger if they had that greater sense of purpose or well-being. So then how do you do it, right? That's kind of the $1 million question. How do you create meaning? And I think sometimes we think, well, maybe people are just lucky. You land your dream job, and if you don't, then it's bad luck. There's not much you can do about it. And possibly one of the most common mistakes I think people make is they feel like they're waiting for that one single thing, that perfect job where they're going to just change the world. And the truth is that everyone is not destined to be an Aristotle or a Mother Teresa or a Steve Jobs. And the danger is not in the desire to positively impact the world. I think the danger is in waiting for that world-changing purpose, and that keeps you stuck dreaming rather than doing something that can be meaningful right now. Jeff, do you think that people can often get stuck waiting for their purpose rather than seeking it out?
They absolutely do. And you talk to people, and they're waiting for this wonderful job to come along, and I say to them, it's the job you've got right now. It's what you make of it, and it gets back to what a lot of philosophers have said, that it's not the situation you're in, but it's how you choose to interpret it, how you choose to think about it. And certainly we all see examples of people who don't have lots of grandeur in their life, but who are very, very happy. And other people who have a great deal of wealth and opulence around them, who are really pretty miserable because their life lacks meaning. Yeah. And they're waiting for something, or they're striving for something that probably won't ever come.
So part of the first step here then is just to simplify this, right? Take the weight out of it, to be able to take that step and find that greater sense of purpose. Doesn't have to be a world-changing event or the perfect job. Steve Cole's research, again, he found that people that created meaning in their workplace did some really simple things. They found it in the kinship and the camaraderie they had with their colleagues. They found it in just connecting in their work to something as an important contribution to society. Infusing some significance in even just trivial tasks. And so simple things that people can do with what they had, the job that they were in, to be able to start to create that sense of purpose. One of the examples, that pops up is this idea of a hospital custodial worker. And, some people kind of view, the cleaning crew, the janitor, so to speak, as this is your quintessential unskilled job. Somebody's got to do it. Boy, I'm glad it's not me kind of feeling. Yet there's some research that showed dramatically different outlooks exist even in people that do the same role, even at that kind of a level of a job. And in one study, some of these hospital custodians reported that they felt to be an essential part of the patient's recovery, and that these individuals sought out ways to support, the patient's healing by adjusting the time of their cleaning when they were coming in. They would chat with with patients as they worked, and some of them even kept in touch with the patients after they were discharged. And so this is a skill. It truly is a skill to be able to find meaning in simple actions that make up our overall workday. The great news about it being a skill is it's something everybody can learn. Jack, we were talking about this. Talk about what you had mentioned about maybe the source of these people's ability to do that, and their role versus maybe their organization or their manager's role.
Yeah. So I think one of the great attributes of leadership is that ability to help people with whom you work create a line of sight between what you're doing and the end purpose of the organization. So the janitor working in the hospital could be there just to mop floors and to dust things and to disinfect the shelves and view it in a very menial kind of way, or he or she could see that their work ties to the ultimate goal of the hospital, which is to help patients get better. And creating that line of sight between how does your job really tie to the main objective of the organization is one of the wonderful functions that leaders can perform. And sometimes, it comes naturally that a janitor would understand that he or she is performing a very valuable function. But so very often people don't, they don't start there. And so they need help in kind of in making that connection. I was visiting a company not too long ago, and as we drove into the parking lot, it was an underground parking lot. The man I was with said, pay attention to this person who's the guard down here who's directing traffic and the one who's managing this parking lot. And here was this person who was big smile on his face, dancing, pointing in different directions where cars should park, making funny comments to people. What would seem to be a very menial job, he had made into a barrel of fun. And that ability to find purpose and meaning, and therefore to make it more rewarding, is just a wonderful asset.
Step one, right? We want to realize that you are in control, that you can develop that skill of creating purpose and meaning in almost any workplace that you find yourself. Step two now, though, is finding that missing piece. So what's that link? Just a personal story here. During this recent holiday break, my family, we purchased a 1,000-piece puzzle of an old world map. And we just thought, over the break, it would be really fun to put this puzzle together. And we purposely kind of put it on this table in our family room that was out of the way. But, I've got 4 kids, and occasionally the table gets bumped and some of the pieces would fall on the floor. And what I found that the most frustrating moments for me when I'd be searching for a specific piece, and after 15 minutes of searching, I look on the floor and then there it was. So I was kind of voicing my frustration about, doing that practice. And my 10-year-old daughter said, well, why don't you start by looking on the floor? I hate it when my kids outsmart me. And so I think this principle really applies to creating purpose. So now that we understand that we have a little bit of control, then this next section is really about let's then look for what's missing and where meaning can get lost in the job.
All right, we're talking about trying to find this missing piece and what is it that we might be able to do. So one approach to understanding this that we've used in the firm is one that we've called the extraordinary moments kind of exercise. Responses can be kind of sorted out into some categories. And the 3 categories that seem like they're very consistent are, first, that what I was doing was something that I was relatively good at. I had the skills, I had the knowledge and the experience, and I was basically, we'll just describe it, I was competent in being able to do that. The second element is that it happens to be something about which I'm pretty energized. I've got some real juice for this. There's some real passion about me doing this. And interesting enough, one of the things that seems to also come up very frequently is the realization that, gosh, the organization really needed this to happen. This was very crucial for their success. And so there was a well-defined organizational need. And what we'd like to explore with you now in the next few minutes is this interplay between these three forces. Competence, on the face of it, in a way, sounds kind of straightforward, but let's define it that it is this combination of a person's knowledge, their ability to apply that knowledge in the form of a skill or an ability, and it's that combination of that skill and your personal characteristics that let you to perform at a very high level. So we would ask you for a moment just to think about you. When you think about your competence, what you do well, what do people talk about? What do you think you do particularly well? And what have you heard other people say about you? What do they mention first when they're talking about your capabilities? Think about where you have been successful in the past. What abilities did you seem to do better than others, or came to you very easily, very rapidly? Now, the second one, this whole idea about passions and preferences. Someone has observed that passion is a little bit like salt. It's hard to describe, but you know it when it's present, and when it isn't, and when it's present, it makes things work better. Everything is flavored by it, and the richness and the texture of things are brought out when there is passion injected into it. How do you identify what creates passion within you? There's a man named Adam Grant, who's a Wharton organizational psychologist, who suggests that one way of kind of finding out your passion is to ask yourself a series of very seemingly simple questions. It's the 3-year-old's why exercise. But the exercise is this: if you ask someone what brings you meaning or enjoyment in life, what they might say is, well, I really enjoy going out and exercising. And then if you were to ask them why, and they might say to you, well, I enjoy the challenge of it. I enjoy pushing myself. Why is that important to you? Well, pushing myself and challenging myself makes me feel more confident inside. And why is that important? Well, if I feel more confident, then I get more fulfillment out of my personal growth. And so you can see that just by constantly asking this why question, you can peel back the layers of the onion until you're getting closer to the true inner core. He uses himself as an example, and I suspect his example will resonate with lots of us. He was talking about, why do you answer emails? Most of us kind of groan and recoil from that daily task. And then he says he has to remember and remind himself that one of his core values in life is being responsive. Tackling his email on a regular basis is a way of him treating other people with respect. It's being responsive. And when he views it in that light, makes it a little bit more worthwhile, a little clearer about why you're doing that. As a firm, we've been really interested in this question. How do you help people truly understand what they are passionate about? Because you can ask people at first blush and they'll say something, they'll tell you something. But if you spend time with them and you really begin to kind of help them think more deeply about it, often you find out that their true passion is something different, something more than that. For example, if I were to say to you on one given day, what's your favorite ice cream? You may blurt out, well, I like chocolate. And if I came back to you a few months later and said, what's your favorite ice cream? You may say maple nut. And if your memory's not very good and I came back a few months later and asked you what your favorite ice cream was, you may give me a totally different answer. So what you discover is that people aren't always reliable in what they say to you because they haven't really had a chance to think about it very deeply. If I were to hand you a list from Baskin and Robbins of their 31 flavors, and in a more rigorous way, kind of really compare if you were faced with a choice between chocolate and maple nut or chocolate and pistachio almond or raspberry, what would you choose? If you force people to kind of make that kind of a pretty rigorous and do that kind of analysis, when the final tabulation is all done, then an interesting new pattern emerges. What you really liked is pistachio almond. And so we would just want to mention to you that we've been working on an instrument that we're going to call the Strengths Magnifier, which would be an instrument that would help people to look at their passions, and particularly their preferences around leadership behavior, to help them understand what might they do that would play on these passions and preferences that they truly have.
In fact, what we'll do is at the survey that will link you to at the end of this webinar, we'll have a checkbox in the survey. So if you're interested in being on a notification list, then as soon as that launches, we can send you a notification and have you participate in it. So watch for that check mark in our post-webinar survey.
Okay, this third element that we talked about in terms of what makes people have peak experiences in their life is the fact that it was what they were doing was tied to some important organizational need. We've all heard the story about the man who walks through this construction project. They're building a giant cathedral, and someone asks one of the bricklayers what he's doing. And as the story goes, the one bricklayer says, "Well, I'm working. I'm laying brick." And the second one says, I'm building a wall. And the third one says, I'm building a cathedral to God. These are very different conceptions of what you're doing. Part of that is driven by how you tie to what the organization is or what the project is that you're engaged in. So if you are having a moment where you feel a little lost or stuck in your work, how do you get that big picture? How do you think about how your talents are contributing to the bigger organizational need? One of the important elements of any work is this understanding that the organization is paying me a salary, and I need to be willing to kind of do the things that the organization needs. And that probably, given my position, whatever it is, the organization is counting on me to accomplish that.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite models that we use with clients. And this intersection really does create that best chance for success and fulfillment. And it also provides a way to identify where that missing piece may be, where we can find it. And so when someone kind of falls out of alignment, we say they're entering a danger zone because basically these danger zones lessen that chance, lessen our ability to have success and really create purpose. So now let's explore some of these variations.
One variation is that there's a time when there's competence and there's organizational need, but there's no passion. And what is that? Some have jokingly referred to this as a chore. And let's face it, probably there are elements in everybody's job that we're not passionate about. Filling out expense reports is not my favorite thing. Doing the annual budget isn't my favorite thing. And if my job was totally that, then it would be a chore. But a little bit of chore kind of can be tolerated. There are situations where there's an organizational need and there's passion, but there's no competence. That's a tricky one, because that's often the situation we were all in early in our career when we were novices. And it's okay to be a novice as long as we don't stay there for a long time. But there clearly are situations where, particularly, we dive into a new project. It requires some new skill set on our part, requires some new behavior. That can be fun, but it does require us learning and developing capability in that area. The one that's really tricky is the situation where there's competence and there's passion, but there's no real organizational need. If that persists, work can lose its relevance, and it can have the people who are doing that begin to feel undervalued and unrecognized if it continues. Final message here, I guess, is that ideally what you would like is where these three elements of people's capabilities and their passion and the organizational need truly overlap and create a sweet spot that's just a wonderful place. And as you think back on those extraordinary moments in your career, I would venture that for most of them, they would be defined as a time when those three elements came together. You were capable, you were passionate, the organization needed it to happen, and that's what made this great success.
And back to Professor Amy Rezniewski, she really suggests that there are three areas that individuals can explore when they're looking at how they might alter their job, how might they go about doing some of this job crafting. And so if you look at these three areas, the first one is called task crafting. And this really involves changing the boundaries of the job. Are you able to take on more tasks, fewer tasks? Can you expand or diminish the scope of those tasks? Is there a way that you can alter how those tasks are performed? The second one is relational crafting. And this really involves the social framework and relationships in which you work by altering those interactions. And so maybe you find someone that you would like to be a mentor to you and have a mentor relationship. Or maybe you want to be a mentor for someone and use that relational crafting to kind of establish some new relationships within the work that you're doing. The third one, cognitive crafting, and this one to me is kind of one of the most interesting because it's really about changing the way you think about your job. And that's comes by altering how you perceive some of these tasks and things that you have to do as a part of your holistic job versus kind of these separate demands that are placed on your day. This change is really something that comes from within yourself. And I love the example Jack shared from Adam Grant about emails. And he's found that he's very passionate about being responsive. And that has changed a very trivial task into helping him live one of his core values and be helpful to people. I think you'll be surprised about how creative you can be as you start to job craft.
I was also sitting here, Jared, kind of smiling to myself about years ago, there was a man named Frederick Hertzberg who was considered kind of one of the early pioneers of behavioral science. And one of his great contributions was around the topic of motivation. And one of his big contributions was the whole idea of job enrichment and job enlargement. And so I was smiling here, looking at and thinking about, we're talking about it now in terms of task crafting and relationship crafting and cognitive crafting. Those are good tactics for enlarging and, enriching jobs. But we're back to the fact that one of his conclusions was the nature of what you ask people to do is a major, component in how satisfied and how much meaning and purpose they're going to feel in their job. So if we can really bring these things together, these ideas of, we know that the job helps to form the individual, but at the same time, the individual has a strong role to play in forming their job, and they can view it in a different way. They can bring new behavior into it. They can bring new information into it, and new relationships into it. It's nice to see that what goes around comes around, and we're finding better ways to do it as the world advances. So in conclusion, we just would summarize by saying a phrase that you've all heard, and that is, life is short. We all deserve to work in a role and for an organization where we feel fulfilled and we are motivated by purpose and by meaning. But we can't leave that solely up to the organization or to your manager or to your coworkers to accomplish that. It comes down to each of us taking action and creating that environment in which we can work. Thanks for joining us.